Welcome to Tech Brothers. In this video, we're going to learn how to add second domain controller to an existing domain controller in Azure. In our previous videos, we had one domain controller. We installed it, we configured it. It's working good for us. But as I mentioned in my previous videos, that our intention is to create another domain controller and add that into an existing domain controller. So there would be high availability between domain controllers. One domain controller goes down, other one will take over, and we'll have our services running in Azure. High-level steps are, number one, we need to do a couple settings in our virtual machines using our Azure portal before we can add the domain controller. Again, the second domain controller, I have already created the virtual machine. I have added all the necessary roles and features. However, still the configuration needs to be done. And in order for us to add another machine to an existing domain controller, we need to make sure that both domain controllers or both virtual machines have communication. If there is no communication, then we will get an error that one machine cannot talk to another machine, so domain controller doesn't exist, that kind of error. So we'll make sure that the communication is there. And then after that, once we are done, we will start configuring our second machine to be part of the domain controller of the one that we have already configured. Then we will set up a replication. This setting up replication is actually part of the configuration. When we do it, I'll show you that this is a particular step that makes sure that the replication happens between two domain controllers. What I mean by replication, so if you create any computer or any user in Active Directory, it should be replicated on both the virtual machines that's part of a domain controller, that the machines that are acting as domain controllers for us. And then we will test the replication again. We will create a new computer or we'll create a new user and see that if the replication is real time and how much latency is between these two machines. And then once that's done, our domain controller configuration is completed and we will be ready to start creating SQL Server virtual machines for our high availability AG cluster in Azure. So let me show you real quick on the portal. So I have two virtual machines right here, TBS Tech Brothers Azure Domain Controller 1. This is the machine where we already installed and configured everything as a domain controller. However, the TBS AZDC2 is the one that needs to be added into our domain controller. So if you notice right here, this is the public IP. That's the public IP I used to remote into this machine, and the public IP of second domain controller is right here. So I have remoted in already. This is our primary domain controller where everything is configured. Let me show you a bit bigger. Our domain controller is AZTBSIT. Azure TechBrothersIT.local is our domain controller. If you notice right now, we have only one server with the static IP of 18. And now we will add another server to it, and that would be also a domain controller once the setup is successfully completed. Everything we have configured. If we go onto the second machine, this is my second machine. If you click on Tools, so previously on this machine, we didn't have the roles and feature that we required, the Active Directory role. So I just added that. So if we click on Tools again, you will see that the Active Directory Administration Center, Domain and Trust, and Site Services and User and Computers now show up. And also, if you notice right here, it is waiting for us to promote this server as a domain controller as well. This is the wizard we will be using in order to add this server in our existing domain controller. But you need to have a user that is domain admin in order to complete this wizard, this configuration. So let's click on this for now and see what kind of error we get. Again, I said that the communication needs to happen between these two servers. So let's check just the communication from the ping side. So I'm going to open the command line and I'm going to ping the TBS as you can see that it can ping 10.0.018. However, this ping doesn't mean that it can communicate with our domain controller. So let's see that what kind of error we get if we try to add this server into our existing domain controller. I'm going to minimize this, click promote this server, and in this selection, if you notice in previous video, we added a new 4S, we created a new domain, configured it, everything is working right. But this one, our intention is we're going to add domain controller to an existing domain controller. So right here, there are a couple options. You need to select either the service or the domain controller directly. Right here, it's very important. Supply the credential to perform this operation. Again, the user up here needs to be the domain controller admin. So in my case, I have created a user. Let me quickly show you that. If I go in Active Directory, you will see the TBS admin. And if you look at member of, it's member of domain admin. So this is the user I'm gonna use in order to add the other server into this domain controller. So I'll go back. Now let me see what the domain controller is. Hang on a second. AZTBS-IT. AZTBS-IT dot local / TBS admin. Provide the password. This password needs to be the correct one, otherwise we will not be able to add that. Click OK. And as you can see, as soon as I added the right credentials right here, it picked the AZTBS-IT, the domain, on its own. So let's see that if we are successfully go further. If we click next, there it goes. We get an error. It says an Active Directory domain controller for the domain aztbsit.local could not be contacted. So this is the same error message you will get if we don't do the configuration I was talking about in our first step. So we will take care of this error, but let's create this error in another way. So I'll leave this right here. Let's think about for a second that we're not going to add this machine to our existing domain controller. We're just going to add this machine as a part of domain controller, domain joined, that's called. So if we try to do that, we should see the same error. So if I try to add this TBS AZDC2 as a part of domain, click OK, and same error. It cannot reach to our Active Directory. Okay, that's fine. Let's go ahead and fix this. Just quickly, on premise, the resolution for this is that you go up here. You remember when we set up our static IP, right here, we do set up the DNS settings as well. So if we go to properties, we provide the static IP here, and then we say that whichever our DNS, future DNS needs to be, we provide that here. This opens up the communication between your DNS and your computer that is going to be part of that DNS. So we do that on premise here, but in Azure it's different. We cannot set up really the static IP like this. We have to go back to portal and set up there. So I'm going to minimize this and go back to portal. Let's click on our virtual machines. Now this configuration does require the restart of these machines. So I'll go on first DC1, go to networking. Remember, we used this same thing to set up our static IP, and we did that with the IP configuration, but now we need to click on DNS servers, and the option right here is inherit from virtual network. We wanted to do custom and provide the IP address of your future domain controller. In my case, it's 10.0.18. And once we add the other domain controller, we can come back and add another secondary domain controller right here, so that this machine knows that there are two domain controllers that it can access the data from. So I'm going to save this. And it says interface will restart the virtual machine. That's okay. Let's go back and do the same thing on our other machine. DNS servers, custom. That's the IP address of the domain controller that is working for us. So we'll save that. And once the saving network interface is completed, we will, just as a caution, we'll reboot the machines. So I'll look at it here. Okay, the network settings are saved. Let's go back to virtual machines and restart them. Restart this one. And I will restart this one. Now this reboot is going to take a little bit of time, so I'll pause the video. Once the reboot is done, we'll be back. All right, both machines are restarted successfully. Now let's go back and see if the communication between these machines are right and they can read the domain controller. So we'll go into the server where we wanted to add into an existing domain controller. So let's quickly test whether adding to domain is working on this computer, because if that does, then we should be able to add this virtual machine into existing domain controller. Quickly check that. So it should ask us username and password. That means the communication is there, not that we need to add this computer as a joint domain, because once we add this as a part of other domain controller, it'll be automatically done. So let's cancel this and now go back to our promote. And again, the same setting, add a domain controller to an existing domain controller, and we will let me first provide the credentials. And this is the user that has domain admin rights. Click OK, and we will take this out. You can provide the domain controller right here. And let's click next and see if we get the same error. As you can see, we did not get the same error, so communication is there. You have a choice right now to make this domain controller read-only, but that's not our intention. We want domain controller DNS server, same catalog, GC, global, and provide the password. This is recovery password, so you need to remember this password if you ever want to recover this machine. Click next. And delegation is not there, so that's okay. Click next. And now this is the replication I was talking about. Where should the replicate from? Any domain controller? No, we have a specific domain controller, TBS AZDC. This is the replication setup. So anything that you will create in DC1, it will go to this machine as well. So click next. Look at the summary, click next. And as soon as you install this, it's going to reboot the machine. Same errors that we got right here. It says physical network is not static IP, but it is static IP. As we know, we set it up from our portal. So click install. Installation will take time and it'll reboot. Once that's done, we'll come back to our video and check the replication if it's working, and also the configuration on this second machine that we just added. All right, our second machine is rebooted successfully, so we'll go and make sure that this machine is also a domain controller now. We can go from this side on the second machine and open DNS and see if it recognized. As you can see, it recognized the domain controller now, aztbsit.local, and these are two machines as our domain controller now. If you want to look at the Active Directory side, if you open Active Directory users and computers and open your domain controller right here, you see right here TBS AZDC1, that was our first domain controller, and this one is the second domain controller. Now we do have to go back and add this DC as our secondary domain controller in our portal, but before we do that, let's go ahead and look at the users. See, the TBS admin is right here, so if we create another user right here, click user, I'm going to call it Amir. Click next. I'm going to set up password never expires and give it the password. Now the replication is merged replication. If you remember from the SQL Server side, you can create the user or computer either side. It should work between both of the domain controller. So let's minimize this and go back to our primary server, which is this one, and refresh our domain controller right here. You can see the DC2 is added there. So let's take a look on the user side. I refresh this and see if the user Amir we created is here. All right, so far it's not here. As I talked about, that we do need to wait to see that how much the latency is between these two domain controllers. I'm going to disconnect this and get it again. It might take a little bit of time, but the replication will work. All right, if we click on domain up here, for some reason the user is synced up here on the domain side. I was looking to see that if it is in the user right here, but for some reason it's not there. If you click on AZTBSIT local, the user Amir is here. And if we go back to the other machine, it shows on the both side. If we click on AZTBSIT, user Amir is here, but it does show in here as well. So I'm not sure that this is how the replication works, but I have tested it, turn off the one domain controller and make sure the other will take care of the users and computer stuff, and it does happen, and it is successful. So let's go back to our portal and add our secondary domain DC2 as well, the fallback domain. So we need to take the same steps that we did networking here, and then DNS servers. See, we had one DNS server right here. Let's put another DNS server as well, because if something happened to 00118, it will it'll pick it up, the 19 one. This is the static IP of the second domain controller. Again, if I save, it's going to restart the computer. Same thing on DC2. Save. It's going to take a little bit of time. Let's go back to our agenda. We did set up a domain setting, and that's what I refer to domain setting that we just did, and we did it before the communication issue that we faced, and we tested the communication between both virtual machines. After we completed the domain setting, we were able to communicate with the domain controller, and we added the virtual machine to an existing domain controller, and then set up replication between both domains as a part of the wizard. Testing the replication testing is creating a user to see that if it gets replicated. It did get replicated, not that my desire was there that it should be in users, but it is in domain controller. However, if one domain controller goes down, the user still would work. And since our domain controller high availability is completed, now we're ready to create our SQL Server virtual machines. That is the main agenda for this tutorial, to create a SQL Server availability group, always on availability group, and cluster in Azure. So this is it for this video. Stay tuned for the SQL Server virtual machines when I create a next video. I hope this helps.